Perspective. According to the Oxford Dictionary, perspective is a particular attitude towards or a way of regarding something. It's a point of view. One's ability to perceive is very indicative of how we see the world around us at any given moment in time. Choices are made, actions and behaviors follow, regardless of what else is happening in or around the scene. My name is Jason Caroll. I am a high school English and film studies teacher here at the American School of Kuwait. And I'd like to share with you why I believe that perspective is the lens that determines our worldview. So let's start off by looking at a couple of images. This is a portrait image of the city of Prague. It's a beautiful city, rich in history and architecture. And from a photographer's perspective, one might say that this image is complete. But the camera sensor itself actually takes a lot of more information when the image is being captured. So is the image complete? Well, if we were to take a look at we see that there's a lot of detail that was left out in the portrait image. The camera captures so much information that the photographer initially only chose to show half of the information. But when we reveal the entire landscape, we see that there is much more detail. I think the same can be said about perspective in our own lives. If we're too narrowly focused and too zoomed in, we miss crucial details. So the question I ask is, can we zoom out? And how might that affect us in our everyday lives? And what will we see around us differently if we zoom out? When we zoom out, can we still actually have an appreciation for those things that we saw only in the small, narrow focus? I believe that we can. So I was born in 1977 in a small East Texas town called Lufkin, Texas. It's about 2 hours north of Houston, near the top of the map. It's a very rural area, a lot of countryside to run around in. If you can imagine asphalt paved roads, barbed wire fences, strolling along open fields, plenty of cattle or horses on the other side of the fence. That's where I grew up. And I count myself very fortunate to have that experience. At an early age, my dad taught my brother and I a lot about hunting and fishing and camping and playing sports. At the age of 7, I was already shooting guns and going hunting, going camping, and playing baseball with a local team, something that I hold very dear to my heart. My cousins also lived in the area, and pretty much on any given Saturday morning or in the summertime, my brother and I would finish our breakfast as quickly as possible. We would zoom out the front door, get on our bicycles, and ride through the woods to my cousin's house. So we had a bit of forest in between where we lived, maybe half a mile, and we had carved out a path that we could ride our bicycles to go and meet one another. And every Saturday morning, Sunday morning sometimes, if we're lucky, and on those summer mornings, we would jump on those bicycles and ride up and down these streets, these paved roads. And we had a few miles that we could ride. We would look for trouble, as young boys often do. We'd race our bikes up and down the roads. And when that got kind of boring or tiring, then we would find ourselves at the edge of the forest. And most of our family members owned a lot of the forest, so we would actually roam around. We would go and explore. Usually that meant finding some creek side to walk beside and look for snakes or lizards or frogs or something to mess with, which is what typical boys my age did back then. So that's what we did. And I think it's that freedom that I had to explore as a young child that really sowed the seed and that love for the nature and outdoors and exploring as I got older. So my elementary school, not much different than the same countryside that I grew up in, was actually built in the 1950s. Red brick building, old architecture, lots of red dirt in the area that I grew up in. The place was called Redland, if you can imagine that. But the school itself was typical. There was a field that we could run and play in and have our races. There was a paved area for basketball, and we had some typical playground equipment, some swing sets and things like that. And like most schools in elementary back then, there was an award ceremony at the end of each year. Those awards are typically given out to students who make straight A's, make the honor roll all year long, or something of the sort. Maybe they were the most improved students. Maybe they were somehow gifted with the ability to never miss class and had perfect attendance the whole school year. In my particular case, an exception was made when it came time for the awards. You see, I had a knack for asking questions. I really like to ask questions. I just wanted to understand more and more and more. And it was hard for me to just accept when my teachers or my parents said, "This is how you do it, and don't ask why." That just wasn't enough for me. So in second grade and third grade both, my teachers made up a new award. It was called Asking the Most Questions. That did get a chuckle from my classmates at the time, and I honestly felt a little embarrassed because here I am getting this special award. But you know what? I think it turned out okay. To my knowledge, no one else ever received that award again. Being that person that likes to ask questions and growing up where I did, I was a part of a family that was very traditional, and I have a very deep respect for traditional values and conservative values at that. We were quite conservative. We were also a Christian family. So as early as I can remember, my parents were taking my brother and I to church every Sunday, and often on Wednesdays as well. We were taught that the Bible was the infallible Word of God, and that we should never doubt this truth, not ask questions. But I couldn't help myself. I like to ask questions, and it wasn't that I wanted to just necessarily prove anyone wrong about anything, not at all, but I was curious. I was inquisitive. I wanted to know more to the story. I could just sense that there was maybe a broader picture to be told. So I would ask these questions, and quite often that would get me in a little bit of trouble because sometimes people do not like you asking questions. I have this vivid memory in 5th grade, Mrs. Arnold, teaching class, and I don't recall exactly what the lesson was, but she began to regale a story about her dogs. She had 2 male dogs, and she told the story of how they could never feed those dogs at the same time right next to one another because that would inevitably lead to a fight. Well, in my experience, that wasn't always the case for every dog, so I couldn't help it. I had to raise my hand, right? So in my household, my parents had actually raised 2 male Labrador dogs, and we had taught them how to eat right next to one another without fighting, and they were well behaved. So me, with that perspective in mind, raised my hand, Mr. Arnold, actually, that's not the case for every dog. We have it different in my household. My dad has taught our dogs how to eat together and not fight. She did not like that very much. In fact, it ended up leading to me going to the principal's office. And all I did was raise my hand and offer a different perspective. I don't know. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I wasn't trying to upset her. So I went to the principal's office. She joined in later, and we had a conversation. Luckily, I did not get a paddling or get suspended. But it turns out she was upset because she was being observed that day by her mentor. And I kind of threw a wrench into her plans. It didn't work out so well for her. I'm sorry, Miss Arnold. But truly, when we want to ask questions that go against the authority at hand or the establishment, we need to consider how we do it, right? That's not always an easy thing. It's sometimes a risky endeavor. But personally, I believe when we have that hunger for more understanding, a desire to want to know more about the story, it reveals that we have a certain level of perception about the topic. It shows that we believe there's more to the picture than is currently being said or currently being revealed. And that's okay. Yeah, when you go against the establishment, you're going to take on some consequence sometimes. It happens. But when the success of that risk and the reward of that success is a greater picture for all to see, I think the risk is justified. Nelson Mandela, known as the father of modern South Africa. He was the first black president of South Africa. He was also the first president of South Africa that was elected in a truly democratic election process. It was a fully represented election. But that position and that fame did not come without a cost. In fact, he served 23 years in prison before this because he dared to unite people in his country against the racist apartheid government that had been in place for more than 40 years. You see, Mr. Mandela had a particular vision in mind. He could see a bigger picture. He understood that people should not be judged or treated as inadequate or less just because they were a part of a different culture or a different religion. He believed that all should have a voice to be heard. He also believed that democracy should be at the system of all ruling authorities, or the base of all ruling authorities. I tend to agree with him. In my own life and my own desire to seek more and to ask questions and look for understanding, I've had the opportunity to travel many places. I'm very thankful for that. I've also been able to meet many beautiful people in my own journeys. And while it may be common for people from my small town of East Texas to quite often settle down in that area and stay right there, I chose a different path. I chose to marry someone from a completely different culture and different ethnicity. And in short, it is that decision that actually led me here to Kuwait. Asking why questions, wanting to understand more, being curious, being inquisitive, these are the characteristics that lead us all to a more open mind, a broader perspective, if you will. They lead us to the place where we can actually see the bigger picture while still appreciating the beauty within the small picture. So I'll close and ask, where in your own life have you been so narrowly focused that you might be missing the big picture? Thank you.